So when I say you're to be selfless, what I'm saying is you're not giving yourself to be a punching bag.
Mm-hmm.
You're giving yourself to be Christ-like.
Mm.
And although Christ went to the cross for us and he took on punishment that was beyond descriptive words,
Yeah.
he was taking it on for himself. He wasn't saying, you now have to do the same.
Hi, you're listening to Java with Jen with your host, Jenna Lee Samuel. On this show, I bring the simplicity of hearing God's voice into everyday life in a no-nonsense, authentic, and super practical way. With coffee in hand and real life in our faces, let's do this. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode here at Java with Jen. I have a return guest on the show with me, Miss Sarah Ho, Sarah Jane Ho of Sarah Jane Ho Ministries. Wait, Sarah Jane Ministries, right? Okay. And she was such a delight. She's coming on again. Before, in the episodes previous, she was shared about lies that women believe about the church and lies women believe about relationships. And today, given the month of love, the month of February, we're going to talk about 3 ways to love radically. Now, Sarah, what you guys don't realize is she is a licensed therapist, which you can give us the technical terms when you introduce yourself, Sarah, but she owns counseling centers, and she is a professional in this area. And this is an area that she wanted to speak to because many times we are disillusioned via Disney or rom-coms or all these different things that teach us what love should look like. And God's ways are usually quite contrary to the way that culture tells us things should go. So, Sarah, thank you for being here, and go ahead and introduce yourself for those who are unfamiliar with you.
Yeah. Hello, Jenna Lee. My name is Sarah Ho. I am the owner of Mended House Counseling in New Mexico. And I'm also a pastor of 2 different churches, one out of the country and one in New Mexico. I love talking to people about God and their relationships. And so, the love is right up my alley. And I'm excited to talk about the radically different way we should love others.
Yeah. So tell me, because you see a lot and you experience a lot in your line of work, was there a pivot point or a moment or even a story that you can share that really highlighted for you? And maybe it was the culmination of a lot of moments, but was there a distinct moment where you were like, wow, love has to look different for us? It just has to.
Yes. So, as one of my main specialties is marriage and counseling. And so most of my married couples will come in and they will say things like, we're just not getting along. We're not doing marriage well. We're on the verge of divorce. And, when you get to the heart of what's going on, it's always, always, always communication. And the root of the communication is selfishness as opposed to selflessness. And so I was seeing my patients were, when you listen to them, it's very much I, and never how can I fix me? It's this is what's happening to me and you did it. And so it's always pointing the finger at the other person and not looking internally as to what we can do to fix ourselves.
So how do you, and I know this might be a bag of worms, so if we can't dive deep on this, that's okay. But I do agree with that because I do feel like most people, the challenge is getting outside of ourselves and learning to serve and love better. But what about in situations like I had been in a situation where I took so much responsibility thinking what you're saying, because I had been trained, you have to learn to die to yourself and give and whatever. But I was actually in a relationship that was toxic and abusive. And so I was trying to learn to love better when really there was actually a glaring problem. So I realized my situation was probably more the exception to the rule than the rule. However, I have found that there are a lot of people that do find themselves in that kind of a position. And the blanket principle of just you need to learn to be more selfless really kept me trapped in that world because I didn't know I had permission to draw a line and say, okay, but this is actually really broken beyond my repair. You know what I mean?
Right.
So how do you
Right.
maybe even help people distinguish that in their journey of learning to love well?
Right. So being selfless doesn't mean being abused.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are in an abusive relationship, whether mental, physical, emotional, um, any sexual, any kind of abusive relationship, that is a lack of that other person being selfless. They are being very selfish.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I say you're to be selfless, what I'm saying is you're not giving yourself to be a punching bag.
Mm-hmm.
You're giving yourself to be Christ-like.
Mm-hmm.
And although Christ went to the cross for us and he took on punishment that was beyond descriptive words,
Yeah.
he was taking it on for himself. He wasn't saying, you now have to do the same.
Hey, busy mama. I know you may have so many dreams bubbling in your soul, and I want to propose that podcasting could be a good way to get started. If you're a born communicator, a teacher, mentor, or you just have a message you want to get into the world, sitting behind a mic is a really low pressure, low risk way to get started and make a mark. I want to introduce my podcast Plan Mastermind. It's a 10-week journey designed for you with bite-sized steps that fit perfectly into your busy schedule. In just about 5 hours a week, you'll have your podcast live literally by Thanksgiving. No joke. I want to invite you to join my supportive, pressure-free space where you will be coached by me to unleash your message into the world. One of my recent students hit number 55 on the US charts within just 2 months of launching her show, and that's not easy to do. And another, working 70 to 90 hours a week, is already reaching listeners in almost a dozen countries. I've created the coaching experience that I really wish I had when I started, and I've packed it with secrets on creating, growing, and monetizing your podcast. Are you ready to turn your dreams into a reality? Let's chat. You can ask all your questions at JavawithJenPodcast.org to book a call with me because your voice deserves to be heard, and I want to help you build your dreams and make them a reality.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't expecting his children to be abused and beaten and spit on and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
He was expecting them to be able to say, I'm going to love you despite your behavior, but that does not mean I have to accept your behavior.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. I like that you mentioned that. So in that, and I think that's probably a whole nother episode for another day, but I just wanted to touch it lightly because it is a factor for some. So
Sure.
what are 3 ways that we would love radically? And maybe even, I feel like those principles should be able to translate even into whether you're in a healthy, normal relationship with normal dysfunction, you know what I mean? Like a communication barriers and learning to be selfless, or even in an abusive one. I think those principles of love can still translate either way. So what do you feel like are 3 ways that we can learn to love radically? And how does that touch the communication thing that you're talking about?
Sure. So, I had mentioned to you talking earlier about how, my generation grew up believing that we had Disney's princess view of marriage and the white knight in shining armor kind of unrealistic version, rom-com, everything turns out great in the end, they get together. And unfortunately, that's not the truth. Society would like us to believe one thing, but Christ is actually 180-degree difference from the world. He is not of this world. He is supernatural, and he does not operate the world the way the world does. And so what he tells us to do in love is completely opposite of what the world says. The world wants us to be happy, but Christ wants us to be holy. So there's one radical view of loving somebody differently is instead of loving them because you're trying to be happy, you need to love them to be holy.
Yeah.
So loving them like Christ and being the person that, I'm doing my actions, not because I love you, but because I love God.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to do what God has called me to do in and for our marriage, even if it goes against everything you believe, so long as it's what God believes.
Yeah.
So that's one. Another one is,
I might stop you there. And I feel like alongside of happy, sometimes we can confuse happy with safe, because
Sure.
feeling safe can make us happy,
Right.
But I want to distinguish that for anyone listening too, is like in a healthy relationship, there has to be safety. Now, in a healthy relationship, you can still have moments of being unhappy, but you shouldn't be unsafe.
Right.
And so, right. And so I wanted to distinguish that for those that are kind of like, okay, well, I'm not always happy. That's okay. That's normal. Unsafe and unhappy are two different things.
Right. So, safety is very important in a marriage. You go into a marriage putting a covenant in place with God to say, I'm going to choose this person above everybody else. I am going to be the best version of myself for this person. I'm going to take care of their needs. I'm going to, marriage is so sometimes nasty that our significant other could be sick and we're having to wipe them in places we never wanted to wipe before. But that's what marriage does. Like,
Yeah.
I'm willing to put myself in that vulnerable place because you and I agreed to keep our marriage the priority just below God in this covenant arrangement.
Yeah.
And so, lots of things can make a person feel unsafe. I mean, any kind of abuse, automatic, unsafe, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
But there are subtle versions of behaviors that make a person feel unsafe. That is stuff like adding another person into the middle of your marriage, whether you're a person who enjoys porn, you're adding somebody else into your marriage. It may not be a real live person that you can touch and see and be in the presence of, but those thoughts are being put into your head while you're trying to be intimate with your spouse. So that makes the spouse feel unsafe, that I'm not enough for my significant other.
Yeah.
So putting another person in the middle of it, whether it's, like I said, porn or a relationship that is of somebody of the opposite sex, and you're sharing details with them that you should be sharing with your wife, that is putting another person in there in that space and making your spouse feel unsafe.
Yeah.
Even words you say, if you're calling your husband lazy, that does not make a husband feel safe in his marriage. It makes him feel like he is being disrespected and unloved. So there are subtler ways that creep in that make you feel unsafe. And if you're a holy person, or if you're attempting to be, presenting holiness, you treat the other person as though they are protected in that marriage.
Yeah. And I think that's where the selflessness comes in, because selflessness takes the role of, once I realize that the little things I'm doing may make you feel unsafe, maybe it's as simple as interrupting you while you're talking, or being overly critical, or whatever it is, that's where selflessness has to step in and say, I'm willing to change that about me in order to make you feel more safe and more loved. And so that, I feel like, would be a distinguishing place where happiness and safety are distinguished, and selflessness and safety are priorities, but are distinct from each other. Okay, so what would you say is the second, that you were about to say it earlier?
Yes. So the second one I would say is understanding the communication style. In other words, instead of me trying to make my point come across and express myself so much that it's like, I need you to get this, and I don't care how you feel about it. You need to be able to ask the other person, how do you feel like I'm doing? Have I been improving in this area? Is there something else I can work on? What can I do to make you feel love? I mean, we talked before about the love languages in one of the other episodes. And I mean, he was right on the money with love languages. You feel like you're low in some area, you can totally ask your spouse, hey, I know your love language is acts of service. Do you feel like I have been doing a good job with being that person that provides those service acts for you? Or is there another love language that I'm just not picking up for you and not doing a good enough job. Because sometimes, like, I'm not a gifts person at all, but when I haven't gotten a gift from my husband or a friend, or haven't gotten flowers in a long time, I'm feeling like, where's my flowers? And I really don't like gifts. It's not my thing, but there are times when those, he calls them tanks, when that tank is too low. And even though it's not the tank that I typically operate in, I need it, filled up just a little bit.
Yeah.
So taking the time to ask the other person instead of them having to ask you. Your spouse should never have to ask you, do you love me? Are we okay? Am I doing something that I should fix? Like, they shouldn't have to ask. You should be able to provide the information. You should be able to say, I love you unconditionally. There is nobody that's coming in between us. There is nothing that is going to ever divide us, babe. We are totally great together. You shouldn't have to ask if that's the case.
Yeah.
And
I was listening to Lisa Turkhurst podcast last night, and she was talking about very similar point she was making. The episode was about lying, and why people lie and whatever. But she was essentially saying the way you build trust is not by them having to ask, can I check, or them having to verify facts, but rather you being proactive about saying, hey, I just want to show you, here's where the space I'm living in that area that you're trying to build trust. And so essentially it's the proactiveness of taking the initiative to say, am I loving you well? It builds trust because you're taking the initiative to show them that that is on your mind and on your radar, rather than them feeling like they constantly have to ask. Once they're asking, they're already in a deficit. And so the damage is already done.
Right. And that's a really good point. The damage is already done. So being proactive, like you said, is an excellent way to show that you love your spouse, because you're taking the initiative without having to be asked. You're actually saying, you know what? I don't think my husband would appreciate me, going to this location without having told him. So I'm going to text really quick and see if he has any reservations.
Yeah.
Or I know that my wife has a lot going on today, so I'm going to let her know that I'm going to be home at 3:30 so that she's not, wondering when I have to have dinner or whatever.
Yeah.
It's thinking about those things ahead of time that shows the love, because it's saying, I thought of you. Like, I didn't have to ask you. I didn't have to check some box off. I actually thought of you on my own. And so, that comes out a lot in the communication. Like I said, your spouse should never, ever have to ask, are we okay? Do you love me?
Yeah.
Because it should be present all the time.
Yeah.
Even when you guys are not doing well, if you're arguing about something or there's some kind of disconnection, that safety of knowing that we are still married, we're not going to separate, it should still be present even in the arguments.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's really good. Okay. So the first one was selfless communication. The second one is proactive communication, right? Is that correct?
The first one was, sorry, just holiness.
Holiness.
Holy version of communication.
Gotcha.
The second one was proactive. And I would say, I would say really selflessness is third, because selflessness kind of plays into all of them. However, when I say selflessness, I'm thinking more of just taking the time to do things that may not be something you want to do, but your spouse does. So I'm going to do this for the sake of it's something they enjoy, and I'm going to enjoy it because they enjoy it.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Not I'm going to do this because I need to check that box so I win the brownie points for the week.
Right.
But that,
and can I say right there, men, it's not a box you check so you can have sex that night either.
Yes. Thank you. So like, for an example, I, for years, have hated sports. I think it, like, to me, I know so many men are going to be so upset with me when they hear this, but I feel like it's a total waste of time. Although the flip side could be said about rom-coms. I'm sure every man in America could be like, yeah, and we don't want to watch your romantic comedies. So there,
Yeah.
I get that. And so because I know that, I have had to learn how to love sports. Now, when my husband physically plays sports, because he's in a football league, he's in a golf league, and he used to be in a basketball league. When he physically plays sports, I am like the most obnoxious cheerleader you could possibly ever imagine on the sidelines, because the man just looks good doing it.
I know, right?
However, watching professional sports, there are some that I really like. I really like watching soccer. I went to the New Mexico Soccer League, and it was amazing. I like watching hockey because they basically
wild.
They're wild. They take their gloves off and they start beating each other. I think it's fantastic. But to watch baseball, to watch basketball, to watch football, I've had to learn to love those things differently. Yeah. I will say baseball and basketball still aren't on my radar because I still think it's a little too boring for me. However, football I have learned to love. I've asked questions. I've actually turned the TV on. My husband will be doing stuff out in the yard. And so we have this TV out in our backyard, and he'll have it on and he'll be watching. I will turn on the same football game upstairs when I'm doing work, just so I know what's going on, so that I can ask him about it later. So I'm still connected to what he loves.
Yeah.
And so I have learned to love it because I know he loves it. I have learned to love golf. I used to not like golf. I thought, gosh, who wants to walk around 18 holes and kill your arms while you hit a ball? But I'm telling you, I so thoroughly enjoy it. And I actually took some golf lessons just so I could be a little bit better, so I'm not embarrassing to my husband. But I've had to learn to do that because it's something he loves. It's his passion. And I love him so much that I want to be involved in the things that he loves.
Yeah.
And so you should be doing those things for your spouse. That doesn't mean I want husbands to take up crocheting because their wife likes to knit coasters. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if she enjoys stuff like that, why don't you buy her some yarn?
Yeah.
And bring it home to her. If she, enjoys going to rom-coms, once a month, take her to a rom-com and sit with her as though it's interesting. I mean, I'm not telling you to cry like a baby because they got together in the end. I'm just saying, enjoy the time, hold her hand, let her know that, you're there with her in that space.
Yeah.
If you're not a rom-com person, period, then say, babe, hey, I know that there's a movie you want to watch. Why don't you call your gal pal and have her go out with you, and I'll watch the kids this weekend.
Perfect.
Yeah.
There's ways to nurture it. And I think that, I have found that, like, my husband loves certain things that I don't love, like football. I mean, I prayed that I would marry someone that was not a big sports guy, so I didn't have to worry about it. And I got what I prayed for, but now I have 4 boys and they're all in sports. So I'm like, well, whatever, there's no way around that mountain. And so I have learned, though, that when it's a football night, I actually look forward to it because I like to get all the food out, and then it's like munchy time and hangout time, and there's a lot of energy in the room. And so I'm totally naive, but I still ask questions, and I have learned to love it because they love it. And so same thing. And so those are 3 really great ways to love radically. It's God wants us to be holy more than happy.
Yep.
But holiness does not mean unsafe. Safety actually is holiness. Like, when you're walking in holiness, it will create safety, which does make way for happiness, but happiness is not the number 1 priority. And then proactive communication, right? And then loving selflessly by taking interest in what they enjoy.
Yes.
Yes. Those are really great. Those are beautiful. Now, listen, Sarah is an amazing woman. She's got to get onto a counseling session, and she took time to interview with me today. So, Sarah, I'm going to let you go so you can do that. But real quick, tell people how they can find you online.
You can find me at pastorsarahjane.com, Facebook, Pastor Sarah Jane, and Instagram, Pastor Sarah Jane.
Beautiful.
And I love answering any kind of God questions. So please shoot them over to me, and I will be doing my very best to communicate what the Word of God says to you.
Awesome. Well, you guys, thanks so much for tuning in. And Sarah, thank you for coming back, especially with such a small little window, but it was still really good and I loved it. And you guys go check her out online. Also, make sure you're following me at JavawithJen on Instagram, and we will see y'all next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. Listen, let's stay connected. Come follow me on Instagram at JavawithJen, where you can follow the latest and say hey. It's a really great way to stay in touch. Many of you have also asked how you can support the show. You can make donations through the Anchor app or on Patreon, or of course by sharing, rating, and reviewing on social media and iTunes as well. Your heartfelt feedback always reminds me why I do this. Also, don't miss our merch store, where you can get super cool Java with Jen swag and coffee. Find it at JavawithJenMerch.com. Until next time, remember, hearing God's voice is simple, and He wants to be a part of your everyday life. See you next week.